Hello everyone, this is Pushpoint, and I am your storyteller. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. Like the video and subscribe the channel.
After where are you from and what time you are watching now, get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The Lamplighter's House. The rain had started an hour before Caleb arrived at the edge of Harlow's Moor, a long stretch of fog-thickened emptiness that swallowed the single-lane road leading to his uncle's estate. The wheels of his car skidded slightly on the wet gravel as he pulled up to the iron gate. It groaned open with reluctance, as though disturbed from a long, silent sleep. The Lamplighter's House, as the locals called it, stood crookedly at the far end of a winding path, its gabled roof hunched like old shoulders beneath the weight of ivy and storm clouds. No lights were on. Caleb thought it strange, since his uncle, Desmond, eccentric and obsessed with ritual, had written in his last letter that the lamps must always stay lit at dusk. He approached the house under a heavy sky.
Each footstep sent up the scent of peat and old moss. The air smelled of something deeper than rain, earth long undisturbed.
A faded grass key waited under the stone folk near the porch, just as Desmond said it would.
But the lock resisted him, stark or swollen from the damp.
When it finally turned, a rush of cold air greeted him, stale and still, as though the house hadn't breathed in weeks.
Inside, the house was darker than it should be. The windows, though unshuttered, admitted only grey light. He tried the switches. Nothing, not even a flicker. The lamps, all of them antique oil-fed lanterns on walls and mantels, stood dark. His uncle's journal, bound in cracked leather, lay open on the hall table. The last entry, barely legible, read, "If they come when the lamps go dark, do not call out. They remember names. They remember voices."
Caleb frowned, the damp beginning to cling to his skin. He set his bags down and lit the first lantern with a match from a small tin.
It flared reluctantly, casting the walls in long, shuddering shadows. He made his way upstairs. The house creaked beneath his weight. The floorboards warped and bowed, just lay like snow over everything, undisturbed except for a trail of damp footprints.
He knelt beside them. They weren't his. Smaller, bare, leading down the corridor to his uncle's study. Caleb followed them.
The study door was ajar, and inside, the scent of something acrid like burnt hair or singed fabric filled the air.
A circle of soot marred the wood floor. The center of the circle was bare, perfectly clean.
No furniture, no dust, only silence.
He slept poorly that night, the rain tapping like nails on the window pane, and dreams full of flickering shapes just beyond the lamplight.
Once, he awoke to the soft creak of the hallway floorboards. He called out, but no one answered, just the wind whispering through the keyhole. By morning, several of the lanterns had gone out, though the oil was still full. He relit them uneasily. Shadows lingered too long in corners.
Objects weren't where he left them. A curtain moved when there was no draught.
The second night, the dreams worsened.
He saw the house in ruins, drowned in fog, its windows like blind eyes, and faces pale, wet, eyeless pressed to the glass, mouths working silently, as though trying to remember how to scream.
He awoke to whispering, not from outside, but from within the walls. He leaned close and heard scratching, faint, persistent.
Something moved behind the wallpaper, dragging itself along the beams. When he tried to tear back the paper, there was nothing, only more wall.
But the whispering continued. He searched the house for records, letters, clues.
A locked drawer in the attic revealed yellow pages, maps of the moor, sketches of symbols, warnings written in red ink. "Keep them lit, they hunger for the forgotten," a voice calls them. A name summons. Caleb began sleeping with the lanterns on, but still they went dark in the night, and each morning more footprints.
One night he saw them shapes moving just outside the lantern's reach, thin, glistening, like damp paper stretched over bone. They never crossed the light, but they waited, watching. On the final night, a storm broke hard above the moor. The wind howled, tearing at the shutters. One by one, the lanterns sputtered and died, though the oil was full and the wicks trimmed.
Caleb ran from room to room, striking matches with trembling fingers.
Nothing stayed lit. Shadows surged in behind him.
He locked himself in the study, inside the soot-marked circle.
The journal was open again. though he had not touched it. A single sentence, freshly inked.
You called them, Caleb. He hadn't spoken. Had he?
In his sleep,
In a dream?
the lamps did not light again, and when morning came, the house stood silent, its doors hanging open. No sign of Caleb, only the journal, pages fluttering in the breeze, and a faint smell of burnt oil.
And in the fog beyond the porch, a line of damp, bare footprints leading away into the moor. Story 2. The Archivist. When Eleanor Hart accepted the temporary position at the Inverleigh Historical Archives, she imagined musty shelves, long-forgotten tomes, and the faint scent of old paper.
She did not expect the building to breathe. Her bus arrived late, and by the time she climbed the cobbled path to the massive stone structure, dusk had fallen.
Rain slid down the slate roof in cold rivulets.
The building loomed out of the mist like a cathedral abandoned by time-sharp spires, narrow windows, and a grand arched door that groaned like a wounded animal when she pushed it open. Inside was silence. Not peace, not calm. Silence as though sound feared to exist here. A note pinned to the lobby's notice board welcomed her in thin, shaky handwriting.
Miss Hart, welcome. Records room B is yours.
Keep the ledgers in order. Do not enter the sub-archive. The key is not your concern. Dr. Kells there was no sign of Kells.
No staff.
No one.
Room B lay at the end of a corridor flanked with high windows.
Rain hissed outside.
Her boots echoed on stone.
The records room was exactly as she imagined, shelves upon shelves of ledgers, papers, drawings. Everything labelled in tight cursive. Shipwrecks, disappearances, plague reports, forgotten families.
The air was cold.
Not the chill of winter, but of depth, like standing at the mouth of a cave.
Her first week passed quietly. She found the rhythm of the archive oddly comforting.
Dusty order, rain on stone, an old clock ticking somewhere beyond view.
But then, little things began to go wrong.
Ledgers she'd just shelved reappeared on her desk.
Ink turned to rust overnight.
Names in the census logs changed between readings.
Pages turned themselves when she blinked. One evening, she caught her reflection in the tall glass door, except it didn't move when she did. It stood, still and watching, then blinked.
Twice.
Her breath froze. She did not look again for several days. She found the sub-archive door by accident, a thick iron hatch beneath the north wing.
A rusted plaque above it read simply, "Beneath lies memory."
Memory does not forgive.
The hatch was chained.
3 locks, no key.
Still, each night she heard the door rattle. Once, she stood above it and swore she heard whispering.
Faint,
repeating, "Remember us, remember us." She stopped sleeping in her quarters on the 3rd floor.
the dreams were too loud, too wet.
They weren't dreams of fire or blood, but water, endless black water, and something stirring beneath it. In her waking hours, she began finding notes in the ledgers not written by her, tiny phrases tucked in margins.
We are kept, but not forgotten.
One must listen to silence to hear. Don't turn the page. She tried to bring it up in her weekly reports to Kells, but no one responded. No mail, no phone calls, no visits. The archive seemed cut off, entirely self-contained, as though time here had unraveled and knotted itself. Then came the Thursday when the lights failed. One by one, the bulbs overhead fizzled out, plunging the corridors into deep shadow.
Her flashlight flickered like a candle in a wind tunnel.
She tried the exit. It was locked, chained from the outside. Rain pounded the windows, but no one answered her cries. In the dark, the building felt different.
Larger.
Breathing, shifting. The walls wept moisture, and the air buzzed with unspoken words. She returned to room B and found the ledgers open to unfamiliar entries written in her hand, but recalling events she'd never lived.
A boy drowned in the well.
A fire in the chapel.
Her own name listed under Accidents 1892.
But Eleanor was born in 1993.
She laughed, sharp and dry.
A mistake, she told herself. A misfiled record.
But then came the night the chains on the sub-archive fell. She heard them clatter to the stone floor, echoing like thunder through the halls. The hatch creaked open. No wind, no footsteps, just the door ajar. She should run, but something pulled her curiosity or compulsion. She never knew. Down the spiral stairs, that air grew wet and warm.
She descended into darkness. her flashlight failing with each step. There were murals on the walls with dead faces, eyes hollow, mouths sewn shut. The farther she walked, the more familiar the paintings became until they bore her face. Dozens of her, frowning, watching, waiting. At the bottom, a mirror, old stained, rimmed in silver, so tarnished it seemed black. She saw herself or something close. Her reflection blinked before she did, smiled, and whispered, "Now you remember." She turned and ran. The stairs stretched longer than before. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned. She burst into room B just as dawn light crept through the window. Everything was still. The hatch remained open behind her, waiting.
She never found her way out.
To this day, new archivists are hired every 5 years, quietly, without announcement. None stay more than a season. The mirror waits. The sub-archive door never locks again.
Story 3. The House at Winder's Hollow.
Winder's Hollow was the kind of place that didn't show up on modern maps.
A black smudge at the edge of the countryside, where the hills dipped into a forgotten valley. No one remembered until they had a reason to run.
Evelyn didn't run. She retreated. The loss had undone her slowly, first the silence, then the dreams. The last thing she remembered from the hospital was the pale, blank face of her husband, Jonah, fading behind closing elevator doors. His accident had left him a husk, alive, but not there. And so she left the city, the pitying faces, and the pitying rooms, and took the offer from her cousin. A cottage no one used anymore.
Quiet, he'd said.
Too much rain for most folks, but peaceful. The house stood alone at the end of a winding, overgrown lane. The forest surrounding it leaned in close, branches like skeletal fingers tapping the roof when the wind stirred. It had a sloped, moss-covered roof and windows that refused to reflect light. Inside, it smelled of wet stone and old soil. She unpacked in silence. The furniture was heavy and antique, uncaring of modern comfort. The fireplace was cold. Its hearth layered with ash that smelled faintly of something burned that wasn't wood. But it was quiet. That's what she wanted, quiet. It rained on the first night, and the second, and then every night after. The constant patter on the slate tiles above her bed became a lullaby at first. Familiar, gentle, but it didn't stop. It never stopped. Even when the sky seemed clear, she could still hear it, as though the rain wasn't outside anymore. She explored the house on the 4th day. The attic had been nailed shut, but she found a crowbar in the shed. It came loose too easily, like the wood had been waiting to give. Inside was a single object, an old rocking cradle, gently swaying though the air was still. She didn't remember rocking it, but it rocked all the same. That night, she woke to the sound of something shifting across the wooden floor. Not footsteps, a dragging, something slow. She froze in bed. The cradle, she thought, but she had closed the attic, hadn't she? The next morning, muddy footprints led from the corner of her bedroom to the foot of the stairs. Bare, small, as though a child had been walking in circles. There was no child. She called her cousin, but the call never connected. The line fizzed and cracked, then fell silent. She tried her phone. No signal, only rain. Time began to stretch. She couldn't tell how long she'd been there. A week? 2? Her groceries never seemed to run out. The fridge was always full of what she last remembered buying. Even the milk never soured. She began hearing crying, not loud, a soft whimpering, low and uncertain. She followed it through the halls, but it always moved just around the corner. At night, it came closer, until it seemed to echo directly beneath her bed. One night, she pressed her ear to the floorboards. The crying stopped. Then came a whisper. "You left us." She stumbled back, heart racing, but the whisper hadn't sounded angry, only sad. She stopped trying to sleep. Each night, the cradle rocked harder, its joints creaking in protest. One evening, she opened the front door to run to leave it all behind, but the path had vanished. Forest everywhere. Even when she walked in one direction for what felt like hours, she returned to the same door. The house would not let her leave. Then came the rain inside the walls. It started as a damp patch in the ceiling, but soon the entire hallway wept. Water streamed from the wallpaper seams. The carpet sloshed underfoot. The cradle filled slowly. She tried to empty it, but it refilled by morning, always to the brim. In the mirror, Her reflection looked thinner,
paler. Sometimes it didn't blink.
Sometimes it stared at her with a softness that made her skin crawl. One day, she found Jonah's watch on the kitchen table,
Still ticking. She hadn't brought it, but it sat, waiting, ticking out the time she no longer felt.
That night, the crying turned to soft singing,
A lullaby.
off-key, fragmented. She didn't recognize the words, but her body reacted with deep, sudden grief, as if remembering something she had never known. She wept without knowing why. The song ended with a phrase that chilled her more than any whisper before.
Now we can be together again. She ran to the attic.
The cradle was still,
But something lay in it now, wrapped in wet blankets.
she reached forward
Hesitated, pulled the covers aside.
and found nothing.
Nothing but a small indentation, as if something very small had just left.
She heard her own voice then, whispering behind her, "You never came back."
She turned, heart pounding.
No one, just her own echo. When she looked again, the cradle was full of water, black and still. She tried to leave the attic. The door wouldn't open. The walls seemed closer.
The roof groaned under the weight of endless rain. She screamed. Story 4. The fifth room.
The inn at Elderspeak wasn't on any travel site. There was no road sign, no listed address. Alan found it in a footnote of a crumbling travel guide from the 70s, which described it as a refuge for the truly lost.
Something about that phrase snagged in his mind and wouldn't let go.
He booked 3 nights, just enough, he thought, to clear his head after the divorce. The drive up was long and lonely.
As he wound into the mountains, radio signals faded into static, and the rain began not a heavy storm, but a persistent drizzle, cold and whispering, like breath against a windshield.
Fog clung to the pines. The world grew narrower with every mile.
When he arrived, the inn looked almost part of the mountain old stone in crooked timbers, half swallowed by moss and ivy.
A swinging iron sign, worn blank by time, creaked gently over the door. The proprietor, a narrow woman named Mrs. Brine, met him in the lobby.
Her smile was polite but distant, like someone going through familiar motions. "We don't get many guests," she said, handing over a heavy brass key. "You'll be in room 4. Breakfast is served at 7 sharp. Please,
Do not enter the 5th room."
Alan blinked.
"There's a 5th room." "There shouldn't be," she replied, and turned away before he could ask more. The halls of the inn were dim, wood-panelled, and lined with oil paintings of the mountain in various seasons, though always in fog.
His room was small but warm, simple furnishings, a fireplace that had been recently lit, and a window that looked out over the steep cliff below.
Rain tapped gently against the glass. He didn't sleep well. Dreams came in snatches along hallways, doors without handles, whispers in a language that felt familiar but made no sense.
When he woke, the rain was still falling, and the clock read 3:03 a.m.
He rose, restless. The hallway was darker than it should be. Far at the end, past his room, he saw a door standing slightly ajar. No number on it, just darkness beyond.
Room 5.
He stared at it.
Something in him needed to look, but he turned away, slept with the covers pulled tight and the fire burning low.
In the morning, he asked Mrs. Brine about the door. She was curt.
"It opens sometimes."
Best not to encourage it.
He asked, trying to laugh.
She didn't smile.
"Don't go inside."
The inn remembers things, places, people. It's not always clear what should be here. That night, he awoke again at 3:03.
The door was wide open. He stepped into the hall, heart thudding. There was no light within, yet something shimmered beyond like moonlight on water.
He stepped forward, then stopped. The hallway behind him was gone. The walls were wrong. He stood at a junction he didn't recognize for corridors stretching in different directions.
The paintings were no longer landscapes, but portraits. People he didn't know. People with blank eyes and faint smiles.
One of them looked like him. He turned. Room 4 was behind him again.
The 5th door now closed. The next morning, he checked out, but found no one at the desk.
Rain fell heavier now. The road was gone. Not washed out. Gone. In its place, a slope of fog and pine forest that hadn't been there yesterday. He walked for hours.
Every path led him back to the inn, always through a different door. That night, he lit the fire and sat with his back to the window.
The inn had changed.
Subtle at first, floorboards groaning differently. Windows now stained glass instead of clear, and unfamiliar voices in the vents.
Then came the extra doors. Room 6, Room 9, Room 12. Each appeared where there had been only wall. Each opened onto impossible places, a field under a black sky with no stars.
A library with books that bled when opened. A staircase that went down for what felt like hours before depositing him at the lobby again.
He began to lose time. Days, maybe weeks. He wrote letters, tried to keep track of the date. But the postbox on the road vanished. Even time itself turned strange. The clock always read 3:03 when he woke, no matter when he slept. The worst was the mirror in room 4. One day, his reflection didn't move. It stood, watching him, then slowly raised one hand and touched the glass.
Behind it, the room was subtly different.
The fireplace burned blue.
The window showed a sky choked with stars he didn't recognize. The reflection now of the single word.
Stay. Alan smashed the mirror. Now he avoids reflections.
Covers every surface. Doesn't speak to the guests that sometimes appear mute. Pale versions of people he may have once known. He is not sure how long it has been.
Only that room 5 is always open now.
And some nights, when the rain is heavy and the world feels thinner, he sees figures standing in the doorway.
He never goes in.
But he knows he will, eventually. Story 5. The Drowning Days.
The town of Marrowick wasn't on any GPS.
Ben only found it by accident, his car overheating during a summer storm, forcing him off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path choked by overgrowth.
The storm turned the path to mud. By the time he saw the town's welcome sign, the engine had already died. Welcome to Marrowick, a place out of time.
It looked like a film set.
One main street, wooden storefronts with rusted signage, a boarded-up schoolhouse, a church steeple swallowed by vines. Rain slicked every surface. No other vehicles.
No movement.
But lights burned in the windows. A man in a long, oilskin coat waved him toward the inner squat. Two-story building that looked like it might collapse under the weight of its own history.
His voice was slow, accented in a way Ben couldn't place.
Storms coming longer. Rooms open. Town's quiet these days.
Ben accepted.
What choice did he have? Inside, he smelled of damp wall and faded tobacco.
His room was small, cold, but dry. The key had a number burned into the wood. 3.
There was no lock. Sleep came fitfully.
The rain never stopped. When he woke, his watch had stopped at 4:07 a.m. and someone had placed a small bowl of black water on the table beside the bed.
No note, no explanation.
When he brought it downstairs, the innkeeper only nodded.
Tradition keeps the memory clean. Ben asked if there was a mechanic nearby. Don't need cars much here, was the reply. Marrowick's got all it needs.
Storm will keep you till it's done with you. Ben smiled politely. He didn't understand.
He walked the town. Locals watched from behind windows. Curtains shifting. They didn't wave. They didn't blink. The general store was open, but stocked with outdated goods, glass bottles of soda with faded labels. Canned meat from companies that no longer existed. At the end of the street, he found the town square, a white stone circle with a dry fountain at its center. The statue atop it was half eroded, a woman with her face worn smooth by time. At the base, an inscription: "We offer what is asked, we forget to be remembered."
When he asked the innkeeper about it, the man only said, "She kept the flood from coming back."
But her price was memory. The rain intensified over the following days.
Ben's phone battery died.
No signal anyway. The storm above Marrowick was relentless.
Sheets of water fell. The sky never fully lightened.
The streets became shallow canals. Locals wore heavy coats and moved slowly, never speaking, never smiling. Ben tried to leave on foot once. The road out vanished after less than a mile, swallowed by thick fog. When he turned back, the town looked different, older. Some buildings he swore he hadn't seen before. The steeple was taller. He stayed in his room. Sleep brought strange dreams, voices whispering underwater, faces without eyes pressing close, and the endless image of a river overflowing, dragging him under. Each morning, another bowl appeared at his bedside. The water grew darker, thicker.
One night, he heard a knock on his door. 3 soft raps. When he opened it, no one was there. Only a note on the floor, handwritten.
Do not drink, do not look, do not remember. That same night, the townsfolk gathered in the square. Ben watched from his window as they stood ankle deep in rainwater, forming a silent circle. One by one, they took bowls black water, like his, and poured them into the fountain. The water rose. So did the whispers. By morning, the fountain overflowed, and the square was gone, submerged.
Ben's room now smelled of river mud. His skin itched. His reflection in the window moved a moment too late. He went downstairs, but the inn was empty.
Even the innkeeper was gone. The street had changed again. The general store now bore a different name, Avery and Sons, though the lettering was decades old. The schoolhouse looked brand new, but the sky remained grey, and the rain never stopped.
Ben saw himself in a window as he passed a glimpse, but it wasn't quite him. A little older,
A little sadder,
something about the eyes.
like he was watching himself from the other side.
That night, he drank the water.
It tasted like dirt and memories.
He dreamt of the statue again, but this time, she had a face.
She smiled and wept.
When he woke, he didn't remember where he was, or why he had come.
Only that the town was quiet, that the bowl beside his bed was full again, and his hands were wrinkled, as if he'd just come up from under the water. Now, new travellers arrive in Marrowwick from time to time, broken, lost. Their cars stop. The rain begins. They check in. They stay.
And in the square, the fountain never runs dry. The townspeople gather.
Bowls in hand, eyes blank, and always, always, the whisper beneath the storm. We forget to be remembered.
Story 6. The Archivist. The rain hadn't stopped since Clara arrived at Winthrop University.
Not once.
Thin, ceaseless drizzle like a veil draped over the campus. It slicked the cobblestones and made the ancient brick buildings seem to bleed rust down their sides.
She was there on a research fellowship just a semester, a temporary grant to catalogue and digitize materials from the Aldegrove collection, an unprocessed trove of manuscripts buried in the sub-basement of the Humanities Library. Her advisor had called it a career-making archive, but no one had touched the Aldegrove papers in nearly a century. She wasn't told why.
The elevator to the archive creaked and moaned. The floor buttons faded from too many fingers.
The sub-basement had its own key, long and narrow like something from a cathedral door.
She'd been told to never lose it. There were no spares.
The floor was cold, always cold.
Her footsteps echoed down long concrete corridors that led to a locked iron door.
Above it, carved into stone, Veritas Meninis, Truth Remembers. The lights flickered when she entered the archive.
Rows upon rows of unlabeled boxes. Dust, molded paper.
A smell like old stone and something sweeter, almost coppery. She worked alone. There was no staff assigned to help. The university didn't even list the archive on their map. After the first week, she noticed her notes change when she left them overnight. Not wildly, just subtle word shifts. Corrections in her own handwriting she didn't remember making. She assumed fatigue, overwork. The hours dragged in the basement. Time didn't seem to pass correctly.
Then the dreams began.
She dreamt of corridors filled with books. No covers, no pages,
Just spines.
endlessly repeating. Sometimes she wandered through fog, chasing her own voice as it called from some far-off place. And always, always, the same ending. A pale, thin hand emerging from a drawer of the archive, reaching for her face.
Clara told herself it was stress.
The building groaned like an old ship. The lights burst and dimmed at odd intervals. But the materials were fascinating handwritten journals, letters, obscure philosophical tracts referencing concepts she'd never heard of. Memory debt, linguistic rot, and something called the recursion of record. She tried to Google them. Nothing, not even footnotes in the library's own catalogue.
On her 4th week, she found the name Archivist Thorne repeated through a series of notes, always with reverence, but no biography or photo.
When she asked the department head, he frowned. That name sounds familiar, he said, squinting.
But no, we've never had a Thorne here.
Later, she checked a roster from 1924 and found Thorne listed as Chief Memory Steward. The next day, the roster was missing. She asked the library staff.
They looked puzzled.
There's no basement collection, they told her. You must mean the historical archives upstairs. She returned to the elevator.
Her key still worked.
The archive was still there, but the hallway was different, longer, the ceiling lower, the lights slow to turn on. Her work log now contained entries she hadn't written. July 14. Saw her again. She watches from behind the metal shelves.
July 18. I asked Thorne a question. He smiled. I don't think his teeth were real.
July 21. The drawers keep opening on their own. Each note was in her handwriting. The ink matched her pen,
but she had no memory of writing them.
She tried to stop going.
But each morning, she woke dressed, standing in the elevator, the key already in her hand.
Rain dripping from her hair. On her 7th week, she opened a box labeled in Latin, Memoria Excisio, Memory Excision.
Inside, glass slides, each containing a tiny sliver of handwritten parchment.
A note attached said, "To forget, one must first record." She held a slide up to the light. The letters shimmered, then rearranged.
Not visibly, but somehow she knew the message had changed. Her nose bled. She dropped it. Behind her, the drawer slammed shut.
She turned. Nothing there. That night, the dream was worse. She wasn't dreaming anymore. She was awake, but paralyzed, her body frozen in the archivist's chair.
The room was full of others like her, hundreds, seated at desks, copying endlessly from blank pages.
Their mouths moved, whispering names, many of them hers. She woke on the floor of the sub-basement.
No idea how she got there.
Her fingers ached. Her mouth was full of paper.
When she returned to her dorm, all of her files were gone. Every digital copy.
Every scanned image.
Even her laptop had factory reset itself.
She told campus security.
They said she'd withdrawn from the university a week ago.
She showed them her ID.
They looked confused.
This card was deactivated in 1978. One of them said.
The photo looked like her.
But older, tired, the rain intensified. She tried to leave town. The bus driver wouldn't take her. No return trips from Winthrop.
Story 7. Reflections never lie. The cabin was a gift from his uncle, a place Daniel barely remembered. Nestled at the edge of a quiet lake deep in the northern woods.
The note that came with the keys was brief.
You'll find peace there,
but never look at the water after dusk. He thought it was a joke. Just old family superstition. Something rustic and meaningless.
Daniel needed the escape.
After the breakup, after the burnout, after the months of restless nights in a grey apartment where time stuck like dry paint, he needed silence. The lake provided it.
The road ended 5 miles before the shoreline.
From there, a footpath curved between ancient trees to the edge of Stillmere Lake. The air was rich with moss and pine needles.
Birds rarely sang.
The cabin itself sagged with aged timbers swollen with rain, shingles slipping from the roof like old scabs.
Yet it stood,
waiting. Inside, it smelled of cedar, dust and oil. There was no electricity. A single gas lantern on the wall, a small wood stove, a narrow bed in the corner with wool blanket stiff from disuse.
The first night, he stood on the rickety dock and watched the sunset over the lake.
The water didn't move, not even a ripple, not even as wind sighed through the trees. The surface was so perfectly still, so clear, it mirrored the stars with uncanny sharpness.
He saw his own face in the water. It blinked a second late.
Daniel stepped back, heart lurching. The lake remained calm. Just the night, he told himself, just exhaustion. In the morning, he forgot about it. Days passed. He cut wood, read, wrote in a journal. No reception, no service. The outside world melted. He slept dreamlessly. His breathing slowed. Something about the place made his heart beat quieter.
But he noticed changes. Small at first.
A tree that leaned the other direction. Footsteps in the dirt that didn't match his boots. Shadows beneath the dock even when the sun was high. And every night, the water watched.
He tried not to look after dusk, but some nights, curiosity won.
The reflection was always perfect, except for one thing. It didn't follow his movements. It stood up when he sat. It smiled when he frowned. It began to gesture, as if beckoning. One evening, he noticed something new. A figure far across the lake, standing still at the tree line. watching.
The same night, he saw two faces in the reflection beside his own.
Neither were his. He dragged a tarp over the windows.
He avoided the door.
He tried to sleep before sundown, but the silence made it worse.
At night, he could hear breathing from the walls. Slow, heavy, like something too big to fit inside the cabin, was curled just beyond the timber.
The journal pages rearranged themselves.
He'd written in them, but now the entries described events he hadn't experienced yet.
The reflection opens its mouth. He hears a knock from under the floor.
A voice calls his name. It's his own voice.
It's not coming from him. He laughed it off, at first, but then the voice came, just after midnight.
From the water.
Daniel, it whispered, soft and wet. Let me in. He didn't sleep the night,
Or the next.
He piled furniture against the door. He started seeing things move in the mirror, a man-shaped ripple standing behind him, and moving until he blinked. The third night, he woke with lake water on his pillow, no windows open.
His feet were damp.
In the corner of the room, a puddle slowly spread, even though the floor was dry above and below.
When he lifted the rug, he found a trapdoor he hadn't noticed before.
There was no ladder, just blackness and the smell of wood stone. He shut it and put the stove on top.
Outside, the lake had grown. It touched the steps of the cabin now, though it hadn't rained.
He opened the journal.
New writing waited inside.
It wears your face now. You are the reflection. He is the man. You belong to the water.
He screamed.
Burned the journal, but the next morning, it lay on the table again, unburnt, waiting open to a fresh page. Tonight, you switch. He ran, packed his bag, but the path out was gone, only water in every direction. Trees stood half submerged.
Reflections moved without their sources. At sunset, he tried not to look.
He failed. The face in the lake grinned, raised a hand.
Daniel did not.
It stepped forward, and so did he. He woke the next morning in the cabin.
He felt normal.
Except the light was wrong. The cabin was mirrored. Everything reversed, the stove on the left, the bed on the right, the words in the journal written backward. And when he looked in the mirror, the man who stared back was not him. Not anymore. Outside, the lake was calm, but inside the water, something knocked.
Story 8. The sound beneath Greystone.
When Miriam accepted the life and caretaking job at Greystone Asylum, she thought it would be peaceful solitude, a roof over her head and a modest stipend. Her life had fractured divorce, no family left, a job market that didn't want her anymore. The ad had read, caretaker needed, must be discreet, no experience required, room, board, stipend, 1 year commitment, remote. She replied in desperation. Greystone stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a black sea that gnawed endlessly at the rocks below. The road wound through forest and fog, narrowing to a gravel path choked with brambles. No one had occupied the asylum in decades. The state had sealed it after a fire. Officially, it no longer existed. The main building was a hulking structure of dark brick and iron bars, its windows staring blankly. Moss grew between the floor tiles. The air smelled of mildew and long-forgotten sorrow.
Her living quarters had once been the physician's office tucked behind the east wing, where no patients had ever stayed.
She arrived in autumn. Rain began the day. She moved in and never stopped.
The wind howled down the corridors at night, warping wood and rattling ancient doors. Still, it was quiet
for the first 2 weeks.
Then she started hearing the sound.
It wasn't footsteps. Not exactly. It was pressure, like something large shifting its weight deep beneath the floorboards. A groan that had rhythm, slow, intentional. At first, she assumed it was the building settling, but then it began moving. She kept a journal. It helped keep the day straight, but her handwriting grew shaky. Entries became brief. October 12th found a door that wasn't there yesterday. Locked.
October 15th woke to humming.
Don't know the tune.
October 19th, all the patient doors are open.
I always close them. Always. She tried to convince herself she was imagining it, that the place, its loneliness, its silence was playing tricks on her. But the sound continued, closer now, underneath her bed at night, in the walls behind the shower, in the ceiling directly above her when she tried to sleep. She explored the wings during the day, Each hallway a ribcage of forgotten suffering, names etched in doors, scratches in the tiles, wheelchairs rusted in corners. In one room, she found a child's shoe brand new, though the wing had been closed since the 1970s.
She found drawings too, hundreds, stashed behind wall panels and loose bricks.
All the same hand,
Stick figures with twisted limbs, mouths wide open, drawn over and over.
beneath them a phrase written in what looked like charcoal.
I heard it first.
Then it wore my face.
The next morning, her reflection blinked too late.
She covered the mirrors.
Days stretched, unmeasured.
The sky remained the same grey, indifferent.
Food began to taste like ash. She began dreaming of stairs that descended forever, each step deeper into dark with stone.
She could hear something breathing at the bottom. Her journal entries fragmented.
November 2nd, it watches through keyholes. November 6th, the walls remember screaming.
I heard it.
November 7th, my voice said something I didn't.
The locked door in the east wing was open now.
Inside, a single chair sat in the center, facing a black wall. Someone had drawn an eye on that wall, a perfect black spiral. It pulsed when she entered, like something alive. She stayed for an hour,
Maybe more.
When she stood to leave, her knees shook.
Her ears were bleeding. The sea outside had grown louder. She tried to leave,
Packed her things.
but the road out was gone washed out by a slide, or maybe erased entirely.
The fog was too thick to see more than a few feet.
She returned to the building.
The doors closed behind her.
Locked.
Now the sound was inside.
No longer below.
It paced the halls, always wandering away.
Never seen, but heavy, real. She left out trays of food. The next day, they'd be gone clean, wiped dry.
One night, she awoke standing outside one of the patient rooms. The door opened.
The bed made.
Her name had been carved into the wall.
Not Miriam. Patient for 117 subject militaries. Graves.
She didn't remember that name. That night, she dreamed of a white corridor with no doors, stretching forever.
She was running.
From what? She didn't know. But behind her, something whispered, "You never left."
You never came. You were always here.
When she woke, her journal was gone.
In its place, a file.
It listed her intake evaluation, paranoid delusions,
Identity distortion.
auditory hallucinations, increasingly unresponsive to treatment.
Subject believes she is a caretaker.
Below, a physician's signature.
Dr. Graves. The same name. The same face. Her face.
There is no more rain.
Only the sound. Waiting. Scraping the walls like a distant voice calling itself home.
Story 9. The Dreams in Rustvale. They called it Rustvale because the factories never stopped corroding. Long rows of metal skeletons stretched across the valley, coated in flaking red dust.
The air always smelled of iron, and the river ran a sickly orange, choked with the memory of work that had long ceased. Jason moved there because it was cheap.
A company town with no company left.
The rent was half what he paid back in the city. The apartment was in a crumbling brick building above a shuttered pawn shop. Most windows were boarded. Most doors were locked with rusted chains. The only working street lamp flickered like it was trying to speak in Morse. His neighbors never made a sound. His job was remote. Numbers,
Spreadsheets.
a glow on a screen.
He barely noticed the passing days.
Only the nights seemed to stretch.
The first dream came his third night there. He stood in a field of towers tall, pulsing things made of wire and teeth.
The sky above was black, but full of motion. The stars twitched like nervous eyes. Something vast loomed in the distance, but he could never look directly at it. Every time he tried, his eyes burned.
He awoke with his pillow soaked in sweat.
The taste of copper in his mouth. The next night, the towers had grown closer.
They hummed a strange frequency.
Jason could feel it vibrating in his ribs.
He wasn't alone as time shapes moved among the towers, tall, jointless shadows walking on tiptoes.
They whispered in a language he didn't recognize but understood. The gate wakes, they said. You bring the door.
When he opened his eyes, his mouth was full of blood. His teeth hurt like they'd been grinding all night.
He started recording his dreams, writing them down.
But the act of transcription changed them. He'd write, "I saw a figure," and the next night the figure would see him back.
He wrote, the towers hummed, and the following night, The hum became a word. For urine, he searched it online. No results. But the next morning, a new flyer had been slid under his door. No logo, no contact, just the word. For urine watches. Are your dreams online? Jason stopped sleeping. But it didn't matter. The dreams came anyway, wide awake. Sitting at his desk, the screen would go dark and show him his reflection, but not his face. Not anymore.
His reflection smiled too slowly. Its mouth moved in reverse.
His neighbors began knocking on his door, but when he opened it, the hallway was always empty.
Except once. A woman stood at the end of the corridor, her skin like soot, her eyes white and blinking out of sync.
She didn't speak. She pointed to his forehead, and when Jason touched it, he felt something wriggling under the skin.
He screamed.
The hallway blinked. He was alone again. He began wandering Rostvale at night. The town was wrong in the dark. Street layouts changed. Doors led to staircases that curved downward for hours.
He once stepped into a laundromat and came out in a field of rusted playgrounds beneath a pulsing red sky.
The stars there were wrong, like they were looking back. Back in his apartment, he found new notes on his desk. The rust is memory. Do not dream in straight lines. You are the root. You are the door. He didn't remember writing them, but the handwriting was his. The power began to flicker.
His phone only showed static. When he tried to call anyone, he heard only breathing.
On the 12th night, he stopped dreaming entirely, but he woke up wrong.
His left eye no longer blinked. His voice echoed when he spoke, as if two versions of himself answered at once. When he looked into the mirror, the reflection mouthed words he hadn't said.
That night, a knock came at his window. He lived on the 3rd floor.
Outside, floating just above the rusted fire escape, was a figure.
Not quite human.
Limbs too long.
Neck jointed in 3 places.
It grinned and said,
"You remember too much." Jason screamed. Woke. Back in the towers. They were closer now. Vibrating with tension, a circle had formed around him, figures chanting. Their faces all versions of his own. The stars above peeled back, revealing something behind them. Something with no form, only presence. It poured downward like tar. Into him.
He awoke in bed, smiling.
The pillow was soaked, not with sweat, but a dark red fluid that smelled of salt and copper.
He didn't clean it.
He looked in the mirror. The reflection was correct again. Only, it winked. On the table, a letter sat waiting. No stamp, just his name. Inside, Rostvale has accepted you.
Your dreams now belong to us.
Sleep well. He tried to leave, packed a bag, but the highway out curved back toward town. No matter which direction he drove, the same decaying factories passed by. The same rusted cranes reaching into a sky that had forgotten light. Jason still walks the streets of Rostvale.
During the day, you might pass him, just another tired man in a dying town. Story 10, Ashes in the Baptistry.
When Elijah inherited the old church from his grandfather, he almost didn't go. The letter had arrived folded in yellowed parchment, sealed in wax.
He hadn't spoken to his grandfather in years.
The old man had been a preacher of a dying flock in a village few maps remembered Asheville, tucked between the hills and the marsh. No power lines ran there, no cell service, just a gravel road that turned to mud in the rain. The key came with the letter, a heavy iron thing, hand-forged, cold. Elijah wasn't a believer, not anymore, but he was broke, burned out, curious, and somewhere in him, that brittle curiosity outweighed good sense. The town was half abandoned.
Maybe fewer than a dozen residents still lived there, elderly, stooped figures who watched from their porches but never spoke.
The church stood at the edge of town, alone, leaning slightly to one side, as if bowing toward the field of dead wheat that stretched behind it. It had no name, just a wooden sign that once bore letters now flaked away by time and wind. Inside, it was colder than it should have been. The pews were intact, but warped.
Dust coated every surface like ash.
The air smelled of candle wax, rot, and something faintly metallic.
In the center of the nave stood the baptistry, a stone basin sunk into the floor, rimmed with scripture in an unfamiliar tongue.
The water inside was black. Still, he assumed it was rainwater, until he touched it. Warm. He pulled his hand back. The warmth clung to his fingers for hours. He began staying there, fixing things, sweeping, cleaning. It felt like something he had to do,
as if compelled by some memory not his own.
Each night, he'd dream of a congregation not living, but grey, withered, lips moving in prayer to something behind the altar, something vast, shrouded, watching with no eyes.
He'd wake with hymns in his ears. He couldn't remember learning.
One morning, he found a book behind the pulpit.
Not a Bible,
No title.
handwritten in looping ink.
It detailed a different kind of worship, not to God, but to the one beneath. The book spoke of ritual, of blood, of the cleansing through submersion. It described a mouth beneath the church, hidden by time, awakened by voice and offering. He tried to laugh it off, just old madness, but the dreams continued, more vivid.
He saw his grandfather in them, hands bleeding, chanting in that same unknown language.
The congregation bowed. Something moved beneath the stone. The water in the baptistry began to rise on its own, each morning, higher.
By the 5th day, it overflowed.
The water left trails along the floorboards, thin reddish streaks that hissed where they touched the altar. He tried to leave. The truck wouldn't start. The road out was flooded. Fog thickened until he couldn't see the end of the lane.
The townsfolk came to the church that night.
Wordless,
Dozens of them, silent, barefoot.
they stood in the pews like they'd never left, mouths slack, eyes closed.
He tried to speak, but his voice caught,
Then the choir began, not singing, moaning.
a resonance that vibrated the stone, that made the nails in the walls quiver.
The air smelled like earth turned under centuries ago. Elijah ran to the door. It was sealed,
Not locked sealed, no give, as if the wood had fused.
He turned
One of the townsfolk stepped into the baptistry,
and sank. No splash,
no movement,
just gone. Then another,
and another.
one by one, until he was alone, except for the sound, a heartbeat, deep beneath the floor. He ran, hid in the steeple until dawn.
When he climbed down, the pews were empty again.
But the water in the baptistry was gone.
Only ash remained. In the center, a tooth,
Too large, too smooth.
too human. He buried it, but that night it was back on the pulpit.
Wrapped in a scrap of cloth bearing his grandfather's initials.
He tried burning the church.
The flames would not catch. The wood blackened but did not consume. And when he turned, the congregation stood behind him once more,
Smiling.
mouthing words he could not hear.
Now he sleeps little. When he does, he dreams of sinking. A tunnel of stone lined with limbs, reaching, pulling. A voice crooning gently in 1,000 tongues, telling him to come home. The baptistry is full again.
Waiting, he knows, one night soon, he'll step into it. And when he does, he will not drown,
He will open his eyes.
and finally understand what his grandfather meant when he said,
The Lord is not above, he is below.
and he is hungry.
Story 11. The Salt House. The deed came by courier, an old envelope found in twine and sealed with wax that had crumbled into red dust. Inside, a letter in spidery script. The Salt House is yours now.
Do not let it breathe.
There was no return address, no explanation.
Only a faded photograph of a narrow 3-story home perched at the edge of a jagged shoreline, its shutters hanging like broken wings.
Mara had never heard of the Salt House. She found it on the map eventually Galbraith Cove, a forgotten hamlet on the northern coast, population unknown. No marked roads led there, just a tangle of winding coastal paths that turned to mud at the slightest hint of rain. She should have ignored it.
But something about the house, about the name, tugged at her. The village was nearly empty when she arrived, just a few stone cottages huddled together like secrets. The locals watched from behind curtains, faces pale and glassy.
The Salt House stood apart from them, alone on the cliffs. It leaned seaward, as if listening to the waves. Time had not been kind, its beams sagged. Its windows were veiled in grime.
Moss covered the lower half of the house like rot.
Still, the front door opened with a single key. Inside, it smelled of brine and something deeper like old paper soaked in seawater.
Every floorboard groaned underfoot, each creak echoing like voices whispering through the walls.
A grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily, though Moran never found any sign it had been wounded.
Upstairs, every room was covered in sheets, but the furniture beneath was untouched by dust,
as if someone had been maintaining it, preserving it.
In the attic, she found a stack of journals,
Dozens of them, all bound in blue leather.
none bore names. She opened the first. She sings in the tide. The house remembers. We seal it not to trap her, but to keep the salt in. We must never open the cellar, never breathe her name. The rest of the pages were filled with drawings tangled seaweed, a woman's face without eyes, symbols etched like runes across the eaves of the house.
Mara told herself it was madness.
Some ancestral eccentricity, but each night she stayed. The walls seemed to press closer. The tides came higher. Sea spray coated the windows even on calm days.
Then the cellar door began rattling.
It was locked tight. Iron bolts. No key to be found. She tried to ignore it, until the dreams began. She stood on the cliff's edge, wind screaming past her ears, the sea black and heaving below. From the surf, a shape rose tall, human in silhouette, but too long to smooth. No face, only rows of tiny gills that pulsed like breathing.
It spoke with Mara's voice. You came home to open me.
She woke with salt crusting her lips. The next day, she found carvings beneath the wallpaper, symbols matching those in the journals.
She scraped them away. The house sighed.
That night, the cellar door stood open. She should have run. Instead, she descended. The stairs were stone, slick with moss. The deeper she went, the louder the sound, not water, but a thrum, like a heartbeat in the ocean. At the bottom, a pool, still, perfectly round, edged in barnacles and bowed. She leaned in, and it blinked. The water blinked. A single lidless eye beneath the surface, the size of a dinner plate.
The pupil contracted, and
Mara remembered. The house had always been hers.
The journals were her own, written across lifetimes.
She was the warden, the seal,
the final breath between it and the world.
And now she had opened it. The sea outside had receded. The villagers stood along the cliffs, weeping silently. The wind moaned through the house. The beams cracked, and from the cellar, something climbed.
Mara no longer felt fear.
Only return, only salt.
Story 12. The night loop. They called it Station 47, but on the map, it had no name.
Just a pinpoint deep in the national forest, farther than any marked trail or ranger outpost. Tom volunteered for the post.
A few weeks alone, a decent stipend, and nothing but trees and silence. It was what he needed after the divorce.
The station stood tall above the tree line, a narrow tower with a 360-degree view of the dark pine sea below. It had no power, only a crank radio and a solar lantern.
A court, a journal, and enough rations for a month.
He arrived in mid-October. The trees had turned gold and crimson.
Wind whispered secrets through the branches. For the first few days, everything was perfect. He watched storms roll in from the west, lightning crackling over distant ridges.
He jotted entries in the logbook.
He even read aloud to the forest sometimes, just to hear another voice. Then, on the 6th night, he heard the knock.
It was gentle, polite. 1 knock. Pause. 2 knocks. He looked out, saw nothing. The tower stood 30 feet above the ground, accessible only by a ladder. No sign of movement below.
The next night, it happened again.
1 knock. Pause. 2 knocks. Same rhythm. On the 8th night, he tried shining the lantern down immediately after the sound.
Still nothing.
He checked the base of the tower, adorned no footprints. No claw marks, nothing. He told himself it was a bird, a branch, the wind. But on the 9th night, the knock came from inside the floorboards. 1. Pause. 2.
He didn't sleep. He tried calling base camp on the radio.
Only static. The battery was fully charged.
The journal entries started to feel off. He'd write a full paragraph. Blink, and half the page would be blank. Entire entries disappeared overnight.
On the 11th day, he found another journal tucked beneath the cord, the same as his, same cover,
same pen.
Inside, his handwriting.
But he didn't remember writing any of it.
The loop begins on night 6. Don't look down during the knock. Don't follow the lights. Burn this book. You've done this before.
That night, the knock came again. Louder.
Slow. Closer. He covered his ears, waited until dawn. The sun rose as usual. Birds chirped. The trees swayed. But something was wrong with the light. The shadows were too long. The sky too still. He checked the logbook. Blank. He checked the calendar on the wall. Day 1. He panicked, flipping through pages. All black. The journal was gone. He searched every inch of the station. Nothing. That night, he heard himself knock from outside. 1. Pause. 2. He rushed to the window.
A man stood below.
Same jacket. Same build. It was him, staring up, unmoving. Tom screamed, woke up on the court. Sunlight through the window. Birds chirping. Calendar. Day 1.
He scrawled into the logbook, tearing pages. I am trapped.
I am repeating. Please remember.
He carved a message into the wall. Do not open door after night 6.
But the carving was gone the next day.
He tried leaving, descending the ladder.
The moment his foot touched the forest floor, he blinked and woke up on the court. Sunlight through the window. Calendar. Day 1.
Now, he marks his skin. Small cuts on his arm to track time. When he sleeps, the cuts heal.
When he writes, the words vanish.
But he remembers now.
Night 6 always brings the knock. Night 10 always brings the reflection.
He waits for the day he doesn't wake up, for the loop to break.
But the forest has no end.
Only repetition.
Only the knock.
And a version of him, always watching from the dark below. Story 13. The room that waited.
Nina found the house by accident. She'd been driving without purpose, down back roads bleeding with autumn, trees flaring orange like dying flames. The GPS stopped updating miles ago, but the mailbox had her name on it.
Not the usual last name.
Her maiden name. She pulled into the gravel drive. A 2-story home stood before her, nestled in the trees like it had always been there. Faint feel from the siding. Ivy clutched the corners. One of the shutters hung loose, swaying gently though there was no wind. It looked familiar.
And it shouldn't have.
Inside, the air was thick and warm, faintly sweet like decaying fruit. No power, no dust. The rooms were ready, dishes set on the table, beds made, firewood stacked neatly beside a stone hearth.
Her name was stitched into a throw pillow, and in the upstairs hall, behind a closed white door, she found a nursery.
A crib, toys,
rocking chair,
walls painted a pale yellow, now faded.
A mobile hung from the ceiling, its paper birds unmoving.
She ran,
but her car wouldn't start.
The road behind her led to nothing. Trees, fog, silence. She stayed the night, telling herself it would all sort itself out in the morning. It didn't. The house was alive with subtle wrongness.
Mirrors showed her looking away. Clocks spun counterclockwise.
The nursery door, once shut, was now ajar.
Each time she passed it, it opened wider,
and the mobile spun, slowly, with no breeze. She didn't have a child. She'd never made it that far. But the grief still sat heavy in her lungs. Each night, she heard soft sounds from upstairs. Breathing, a giggle, tiny feet pattering across floorboards. She didn't go look, but she started leaving the door closed again. Each morning, it was open, and the crib looked slept in. A small indent in the mattress. A folded blanket moved slightly to the left. By the 5th day, she found a baby monitor on her nightstand. Old, analog, covered in dust. She turned it on. Static, then a whimper. Then the sound of a lullaby music box playing a key. She dropped it, pulled the plug,
threw it into the woods. It was back the next morning, and she heard her voice through it, humming the lullaby she used to sing to the child she never had.
The one she'd imagined in the hospital. Fingers curled around hers in the seconds before the machine screamed and hope died.
Now the house seemed to remember more than she did.
She found photos on the mantel. A woman her cradling a child whose face was always blurred, always turned away. There were footprints on the staircase, tiny, damp.
One night she woke to see the rocking chair moving gently.
The sound of a soft lullaby drifting from the room. The same song. She stood in the doorway, heart splintering, and the mobile stopped. The crib creaked. A whisper, thin as breath. Why did you leave me? She sobbed. I never had. The room exhaled. The mobile turned, and from behind her, a child's shadow darted down the hall. She chased it. Every door she opened led back to the nursery. The walls began closing in, the ceiling lowering, the crib growing taller.
wider, its bars like reeds. She screamed, and the room went still. She passed out. When she awoke, the house was quiet, dust covered again.
Cold. The mobile was tangled. The crib empty.
The baby monitor gone.
She stepped outside.
Her car started.
She drove until trees turned to towns and towns to cities, until she was surrounded by noise, people, reality. But sometimes, when she sleeps, she dreams of that yellow room and the sound of a child crying just out of reach.
The GPS on her phone shows the house as a waypoint. She never entered it, but she left something there.
And it remembers.
Story 14. The hollow beneath.
The letter was typed.
No return address.
Just a single sentence. They're forgetting us. Come back before the last light dies.
Ellis hadn't thought of Briar Ridge in 20 years. He'd left at 18 and never looked back. It was a mining town, small and grey, nestled deep in the Appalachian hills, half forgotten even when it was alive.
But the letter pulled at something. Not guilt, not nostalgia.
Something like gravity.
He drove in at dusk. The road narrowed the closer he came, until even his headlights seemed muffled by the dense forest lining the hills. He passed the rusted welcome sign.
Briar Ridge Park, 1482.
Only the 4 was missing.
Someone had scratched over it, replacing it with an O.
The town was still there, but barely. Rows of sagging houses, boarded up shops,
windows like empty eyes.
Every step he took on the cracked sidewalk echoed like it was being swallowed by something deeper.
The mine had been sealed long ago. A cave-in, people said.
Others whispered of strange gases.
Men who came out wrong. Men who heard things.
Ellis hadn't cared back then. He just wanted to leave. But now, something about the silence felt personal. He stayed in the old boarding house. No one checked him in. No one else seemed to live there. But the bed was made. The water ran cold.
At night, he dreamed of soil cracking open.
Of hands reaching upward from beneath. He visited the library.
Dust choked every aisle.
But the logbooks were intact. Each year, fewer entries.
Fewer names.
The last one, Ellis Gray returned. Final one. He didn't write it.
That night, he walked the streets.
The town was still.
But windows flickered with movement.
Curtains switched. Lights glowed faintly behind stained glass. Not people exactly. Not anymore. The statue in the town square had changed. It used to be a miner. Strong.
Lantern in hand. Now the stone face had been worn away.
The lantern replaced with a hole. A hollow space where light should be.
He leaned in. Inside, darkness spiraled down.
Not shadow. Depth. And he heard breathing. When he turned, the street was empty again. The next morning, the sky hung low,
heavy with a pale grey mist that had no source and didn't move.
He asked around.
A woman in the diner looked at him with wet, glassy eyes.
We forgot the names. They took them.
Took the heat.
Took the clocks.
Took. They're under us.
They made the mine. We only borrowed it. That night, the power died. The streetlights never came on. He walked with a lantern he found in the basement.
At the edge of town, where the mine entrance had been sealed, the ground was cracked open.
A wide, black fissure, as if something beneath had exhaled and the earth gave way. And around it, the townspeople stood, still, silent, as if waiting. Their mouths hung slightly open,
their skin pallid and dry, like stone soaked in cold.
One by one, they turned to look at Ellis. In the dark, he saw his father among them,
his mother,
his brother,
dead from the mine accident all those years ago.
They were all there. They whispered together, "You're the last one. The weight must be even." He backed away.
The crack yawned wider.
A hand emerged, not human, not anymore.
Smooth,
jointless, fingers like roots. He ran.
But no matter how far he drove, the road circled back to Briar Ridge, the town where no one dies anymore. They just sink beneath, becoming part of the hollow. He's still there.
Somewhere. He forgets his own name now. The stars are dimmer. The mine breathes louder.
And in the town square, the statue's hollow grows.
Waiting.
Story 15. Fogbound.
The lighthouse had been there for centuries. A solitary sentinel on the ragged coast of Grayshore. Its white paint was peeling. The glass cracked and fogged. But its beam still swept the dark waters every night.
Elias had taken the job after the last keeper disappeared without a trace. He was no stranger to solitude. The sea had always called to him, its vast silence a balm to the noise of the world. His first few nights were peaceful.
The fog rolled in like a slow tide, wrapping the lighthouse in a damp embrace. The sound of waves crashing below was a constant drum, lulling him into a fragile calm.
But then the fog began to change.
It thickened, swirling like smoke against the windows. Shapes moved within it, pale figures that lingered just beyond the glass, dissolving when he tried to focus. On the fifth night, Elias woke to the sound of footsteps on the spiraling stairs, slow, deliberate. No one was supposed to be there. He grabbed his lantern and crept upward. Nothing.
The air was cold and heavy, smelling faintly of salt and something else decayed.
He returned to his quarters, but the footsteps followed, faint and distant, echoing through the stone walls. The radio crackled with static, then a voice, soft and whispering, almost indistinguishable over the white noise.
"Help! Help me!" Elias froze. The voice was desperate, childlike. He tried to reply, but the radio fell silent. That night, he dreamt of the sea endless, black water with faces rising just beneath the surface.
Their mouths moved silently, pleading. He woke gasping,
the lantern flickering wildly.
Over the following days, the fog thickened further. It seeped through cracks, curling like fingers around the lighthouse beam.
Elias found scratches on the walls, thin, erratic lines like desperate claws. His reflection in the cracked glass seemed delayed, movements out of sync.
He began to hear whispers not through the radio, but in the silence between the waves. They spoke his name. One evening, a figure appeared at the lighthouse door, translucent, wavering like smoke. It raised a pale hand.
Elias didn't move.
The figure vanished, leaving behind a chilling cold.
His mind frayed with exhaustion and fear. He tried to signal a passing ship, but the radio only hissed static and those desperate whispers. At times, the fog parted just enough to reveal a dark shape in the water, massive, unidentifiable, watching. Elias found the journal in the old keeper's quarters. The pages were water-stained and nearly illegible, but one passage stood out.
They come with the fog, seeking the lost.
Once the fog claims you, the sea forgets your name. He understood now.
The fog wasn't just weather, it was a shroud, a gateway. He was already caught. On the 12th night, the fog surged into the lighthouse, thick and suffocating. The beam faltered and died. The whispers became screams.
Elias ran to the door, but it slammed shut before his hands could grasp the handle.
The walls seemed to pulse and breathe. The floor beneath him rippled like water, and through the fog, pale faces pressed close to the windows, eyes hollow and accusing.
He screamed, a sound swallowed by the thick, cold air.
The next morning, the lighthouse stood silent, its beacon dark.
Fishermen avoided the cove, speaking of a light that vanished with the fog, and in the mist, a new figure watches, waiting for the next keeper to arrive. Story 16. The Archive of Forgotten Whispers.
The library was older than anyone in the town could remember.
Its walls, made of crumbling stone and dark wood, seemed to absorb sound.
The floors creaked underfoot, but in the vast halls and endless shelves, silence prevailed.
Adrian had taken the job as an archivist out of curiosity, a way to escape the relentless buzz of city life.
His task was simple: catalogue the dusty manuscripts, fragile scrolls, and forgotten tomes that no one dared touch. But from the moment he crossed the threshold, something felt wrong. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew. Light filtered weakly through stained glass windows, casting dim colors that never quite reached above corners. He worked by lantern light, the shadows dancing with each flicker.
Days passed unnoticed.
The silence grew oppressive, broken only by the soft rustle of pages and the occasional distant groan of settling wood. One evening, as rain pelted the windows, Adrian found a hidden section behind a forged wall. The shelves were stacked with journals bound in cracked leather, their spines unmarked. Opening the first, he read entries written in a spidery script, accounts of the library's early days, records of visitors who never left. Notes on a whispering tone that absorbs the reader's voice.
Unease crept into his thoughts. That night, he heard whispers,
not from outside, but inside the walls.
Faint voices, fragmented words, names he didn't recognize.
He followed the sounds through the labyrinth of shelves. At the heart of the maze, he found an ancient book, bound in dark cloth.
Its pages were blank.
He opened it, and a rush of cold air spilled forth, carrying the whispers louder, urgent, pleading.
Words formed on the blank pages in ink like shadows.
Read to remember, speak to forget.
The room darkened.
The lantern flickered and dimmed. Adrian felt a pull, as if the book wanted his voice.
He closed it and ran back to his quarters, heart pounding.
But the whispers followed.
They came through the walls, through the cracks in the floorboards, seeping into his mind. He spoke aloud, hoping to dispel them. But the more he talked, the quieter they became until silence swallowed everything. Days blended.
He lost track of time. In the mirror, his reflection wavered, mouth moving without sound.
His journal entries became mere scribbles, frantic, desperate. He found his voice was fading. One evening, he tried reading from the whispering tome again.
Words spilled from his lips, and the room filled with shadows.
Figures formed in the darkness, faces of those who had come before, trapped in silence.
They reached out, mouths opening but no sound escaping. Adrian understood. The library did not just keep books.
It kept souls.
Each reader lost their voice, their essence, becoming part of the archive.
He felt his throat tighten, words caught like thorns.
He tried to scream, but only whispers emerged. The lantern guttered and died. He was swallowed by darkness and silence.
Now the library waits for the next visitor, the next voice to consume. And deep in the stacks, a new book waits, its pages planked and hungry. Story 17. The sound beneath the floor. The old farmhouse had been abandoned for years before Maeve arrived.
Nestled on the edge of a forgotten valley, it seemed to lean into the earth, its wooden beams bowed with age and neglect.
Maeve wanted solitude, a break from city noise and the relentless pressure of modern life.
She moved in with only a few boxes and a worn journal inherited from her grandmother, who had lived in the house decades before. The first days passed in quiet, broken only by the creaks and sighs of the settling wood, and the occasional call of distant birds. But soon, something else began. At first, a faint thump beneath the floorboards. One thump, then silence.
Maeve tried to tell herself it was the wind, a trapped animal, or the house settling.
But the noise persisted, regular, deliberate.
At night, it grew louder.
One thump, pause. Two thumps, like a slow heartbeat from beneath the earth. She checked the cellar. Empty. The floor above it bare boards. Nothing hidden.
She called a pest control company.
They found no signs of rodents or pests. The noise continued. Maeve began to dread nightfall. She stopped sleeping. Her dreams became places she had never seen, endless tunnels of dark stone, cold and dripping, lined with whispers.
The journal from her grandmother offered no comfort. Instead, it held cryptic warnings. Listen not to what lies beneath. Some sounds are better left unheard.
One night, the thumping changed. It grew frantic. One thump, one thump, one thump, pause. A desperate series of rapid knocks.
Maeve pressed her ear to the floor.
A voice, muffled and desperate, called her name. She staggered back. The walls seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding in rhythm with the thumps. Her reflection in the mirror twisted, lips moving in silent screams.
Her skin prickled with cold. She found scratches on the floorboards, long, jagged lines as if something tried to claw its way up. Determined, she pried the floorboards loose. Beneath was a cavity, but no crawl space. Only cold, wet earth. Her lantern flickered. From the darkness beneath, a cold breath brushed her hand. Maeve recoiled. That night, the house seemed alive.
The thumping echoed through every wall, a relentless drum that filled her ears and mind. She heard whispers in the wind, voices calling her, pleading, warning.
Her phone lost signal.
Her car wouldn't start. The house was a cage.
Days blurred. The thumping was constant.
On the seventh night, the floorboards gave way beneath her feet.
She fell into a pit of cold earth and darkness.
A deep, subterranean chamber revealed itself. The walls pulsed with a sickly light. Shapes moved just beyond sight, indistinct forms writhing in the shadows. And beneath it all, the thumping grew louder, a monstrous heartbeat, slow and steady. echoing through the bones of the earth. Maeve screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the cavern.
She realized then the truth.
The house was built over something alive, something ancient, and it had been waiting.
Waiting for her. Story 18. The village that forgot.
The bus dropped Mara at the edge of the village just as the sun sank beneath the hills, casting long shadows over crooked rooftops and narrow, winding lanes. She had never heard of the place before. A dot on no map, whispered about in old travel journals as a place people passed through but never stayed.
Mara had come seeking answers. Her sister had vanished here years ago, and the local police had called it a runaway case, closed for lack of evidence.
But the villagers still remembered.
Or at least, they did once.
The houses looked empty, their windows dark and lightless, curtains drawn tight. Only a few figures lingered at the edges watching. They didn't speak to her. They just watched. The air was thick and cold, smelling faintly of damp earth and smoke.
Mara tried the inn, but it was locked. No one answered her knocks.
She wandered the streets, calling out.
Her voice echoed oddly, as if swallowed by thick walls.
At the square stood a statue-weathered stone of a woman with hollow eyes, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Nearby, the church door hung ajar, revealing darkness within.
As night fell, Mara felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing on her.
She heard footsteps behind her, soft, unsteady, never quite matching her pace.
When she turned, no one was there.
Her phone had no signal.
She found a diary in the rubble of what looked like a schoolhouse. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with entries from a girl named Eerie, her sister's name. The final entries were desperate and disjointed.
They watch from the windows. The shadows move when no one looks.
I am fading.
The village forgets.
Mara felt a chill deep in her bones. She decided to leave, but found the roads looping back, the village closing in like a tightening noose.
The watchers appeared at every turn, pale faces framed by dark windows, eyes glinting with something inhuman. At the church, the door creaked open fully. Inside, the pews were empty, but the altar was draped in cobwebs and strange symbols carved into the stone floor.
A low hum filled the air, a chant in a language she didn't understand, but felt resonate within her chest. Mara tried to run, but the streets shifted.
Walls grew taller, paths twisting impossibly. The statue in the square seemed to pulse, its mouth opening wider, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Voices whispered from the shadows. Remember, forget.
Her sister's face appeared in a window, pale, eyes wide, lips moving silently. Mara screamed for her to come back, but the face faded like mist.
The village was alive not with people, but with memory.
It kept those who stayed, feeding on their names until they too became whispers. Mara felt her own memories slipping, names, faces, moments dissolving into nothing.
And the watchers smiled, waiting for the next to forget.
Story 19. Echoes in the asylum. The asylum sat on a hill, looming over the town like a shadow cast by a long-forgotten sin.
Its stone walls were cracked, windows shattered or boarded up, and vines crept through every crevice as if the earth itself was reclaiming the place.
Jude arrived just before twilight, the cold wind carrying whispers through broken corridors and rusty gates.
He wasn't here by chance. His grandmother had been a patient here decades ago, and stories of her time fragments and rumors had haunted his family for years. The asylum was officially closed, condemned for safety hazards.
But Jude had a key, found in his grandmother's old trunk, and a name scratched on the inside cover of her journal. Room 17.
He crossed the threshold, the heavy door groaning behind him. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the drip of water and distant echoes. The walls were peeling paint and faded, scrawled messages. They hear you. Don't sleep. We're still here. Jude's flashlight flickered as he moved through the corridors, each step stirring dust and memories. He found the infirmary, the operating room, the therapy wings, all abandoned and frozen in time. At the end of a long hallway, he found room 17. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was thick with decay and cold dread. An old chair sat in the center, stained and cracked. Jude's grandmother's journal lay on the floor, open to a page marked with a dried tear. They whisper in the dark. The walls bleed memories. The past isn't dead here. As he read, the room seemed to breathe. Shadows shifted. A soft murmur rose around him, voices speaking just beyond comprehension. Suddenly, a flicker of movement, a pale figure standing in the corner, features blurred and shifting like smoke. Jude blinked, but it was gone. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into words. Remember, remember. He tried to leave, but found the hallway changed. Doors that led nowhere. Walls closing in. Time bent and twisted.
Moments repeated like a broken record.
He saw flashes, scenes of pain, sorrow, and fear trapped in the asylum's walls.
Patients pleading. Doctors watching coldly. Screams swallowed by silence.
Jude realized the asylum wasn't empty. It was alive with echoes, memories trapped in a loop of torment.
He felt his mind fray as the voices pulled him deeper.
His grandmother's face appeared, her eyes hollow, lips moving in silent agony. "Help me," she whispered, but the longer he stayed, the more he forgot himself. Names, faces, his purpose all slipping away like smoke through fingers.
When morning came, the asylum was quiet again.
Jude's flashlight lay shuttered on the floor.
Outside, the wind carried faint whispers, echoes waiting for the next visitor to join the endless chorus.
Story 20. The Hollow in the Woods. The cabin stood alone in the heart of the forest, a weathered structure surrounded by towering pines and thick undergrowth.
Its windows stared blankly into the gloom, and the path leading to it was barely visible beneath years of fallen leaves.
Claire had sought the place for peace, a retreat from the chaos of her life. The forest, with its endless green and quiet shadows, promised solitude and healing. On her first day, the woods seemed benign.
Birds called softly, and sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered beams.
But as twilight approached, the forest changed. Shadows deepened. The wind whispered through the trees low, almost human-sized, that curled like smoke around the cabin. That night, Claire heard the first sound, a soft thumping, coming from outside, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat.
She told herself it was an animal or a falling branch, but sleep eluded her.
Days passed. The sounds grew more distinct. Scratches on the wooden walls appeared overnight long. Thin marks gouged deep into the aged wood.
She found footprints in the mud too large and oddly shaped to be any forest creature she knew. One afternoon, exploring a clearing beyond the cabin, Claire found a hollow in the earth.
It was a pit, roughly carved, dark and silent. The air near it felt colder, heavier. She dropped a stone into the hollow and listened. The sound took an unnerving moment to reach the bottom, as if the pit was deeper than it appeared.
That night, the whispers returned, voices just beyond hearing, murmuring from the trees around the cabin. Claire's dreams were invaded by shadowy figures watching from the woods, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She awoke to find the cabin door wide open, the cold night air rushing in. Her belongings had been moved, rearranged in subtle, unsettling ways.
The scratches on the walls seemed fresher. The next day, she tried to leave, but the forest had changed. Paths twisted, trees shifted positions, and the way back was lost. The sun vanished behind a thick blanket of mist, swallowing the woods in grey silence.
At the hollow, she found a bone white and brittle, cracked like ancient porcelain.
The whispers grew louder, urging her to descend. Claire's mind fractured under the weight of isolation and fear. She climbed into the hollow, descending into darkness that swallowed sound and light. The walls pulsed faintly alive, breathing. Shapes formed at the edge of her vision tore. Thin figures with elongated limbs and faces without features. They reached for her, not with hands, but with an oppressive presence that crushed her thoughts. Her voice caught in her throat, words turning to silence. In the deepest part of the hollow, she found a mirror cracked and covered in dirt. Her reflection shimmered, then changed. Not herself, but a hollow shell, eyes empty, mouth fixed in a silent scream. The forest swallowed her scream. Outside, the cabin waited silent and watchful, waiting for the next soul to wander into the hollow and never leave.